So I would now like to welcome the Chair of the Menzies Foundation to the podium to officially welcome you all to Clarendon Terrace, Mr Brian Doyle.
Thank you, Sarah. Mrs Heather Henderson, Mr Peter Henderson, members of the Menzies and Henderson families, Mr Josh Frydenberg, and can I also welcome his mother, Dr Erica Frydenberg, with whom I've just had a lovely chat outside, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here to the Clarendon Terrace, which has been the headquarters, the site of the Menzies Foundation since 1981. And many of you will know this building from the past, but if any of you want to have a look around afterwards and to look at some of the memorabilia, which we have examples of here, but elsewhere, you're very welcome to do so. We also have some brochures about the foundation. Now, before I introduce Josh Frydenberg, who in turn is going to launch Heather Henderson's book, I just want to say a little bit about Josh's background. At the present time, he is the federal member for Kooyong, and it's a lovely coincidence that that was the seat which Sir Robert held for so many years. And he is in the position of Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, with specific responsibilities for implementing the Coalition's deregulation agenda, which will be a very challenging job, I'm sure. In his early education was at Bialik College and then at Mount Scopus College. Josh went on to Monash University and gained degrees with honours in economics and in law. He did his articles at what was then known as Mallis and Stephen Jakes, and now has a slightly different name, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. Things change so readily. He went on to graduate at Oxford University, having gained a Commonwealth scholarship, and he studied there for a Masters in International Relations. And I have some synergy with that particular scholarship because in 1961 I went to Oxford on the same Commonwealth scholarship. And subsequently Josh went to Harvard to the Kennedy School of Government, where he gained the degree of Masters in Public Policy. Josh spent time doing other things before he went specifically into the world of politics. He worked with Deutsche Bank for a period of time, and he was a former senior advisor to Alexander Downer, our previous foreign minister, and to Prime Minister John Howard. And I'm told that he is a very keen tennis player, and he sits on the board of the Kids Tennis Foundation, which provides coaching to disadvantaged kids. I'd very much like you to welcome Josh Frydenberg.
Menzies and Henderson families, to great friends Stan Guilfoyle and Ron Wilson and Michael Kroger, Alan Gregory and Peter Nixon, and of course to my great friend Heather Henderson. I feel very privileged that Heather has given me the honour today to officially launch this book. Heather has been a mentor and a friend, not just since I was elected in 2000 to the seat of Kooyong, which her father held for some 32 years, but even before that. And I've treasured the friendship and the advice that you have given me, and I really appreciate this deep honour today, so thank you very much. A Smile for My Parents is a remarkable book. Its pages spring to life with until now little known anecdotes and vignettes about the lives of two very special Australians, Sir Robert and Dame Patty Menzies. Its author, Heather Henderson, has successfully achieved her aim of bringing to life her parents as real people and showing us all why the former Australian diplomat and war veteran Sir Walter Crocker was right when he once said to Heather, "You are one of fortune's most favoured children." As readers, we learn early on of the proud Menzies and Lecky families, both close-knit, with strong Christian values, links to country Victoria, and steeped in political tradition. Sir Robert's parents on both sides had family members in either the state or federal parliament, and Dame Paddy's father, John Lecky, was the member for Indi and later a Victorian senator who served in her son-in-law's cabinet. Something John Lecky would not have foreseen when decades earlier a young and nervous Robert went around to the Lecky home to seek permission from John to take his daughter's hand in marriage. Finding John pruning the roses, Sir Robert couldn't quite get the words out, leaving Mr. Lecky to go inside and say to his daughter Paddy, "I just wish Robert would get on with it." The author opens our eyes to Robert's love of poetry and literature and his workmanlike approach to perfecting the art of speaking. As a young boy, he was late to offer his first words, only doing so aged 3, which he was later to say it was only because he didn't want to make a fool of himself by making mistakes. His uncle Sid Sampson attended Robert's first political speech, after which he told him matter-of-factly that as a speech it may have been good for the High Court, but as a political speech it was deeply inappropriate. For Uncle Sid, a good political speech involved speaking simply, introducing a little humour, and to keep repeating a few uncomplicated ideas. Sir Robert took this advice on board and developed a devastating technique, later well summarised in a letter he wrote to his granddaughter Edwina. And it says from the book, and I quote, "When I had a big speech to make in the House, I would begin by making brief notes, merely as a reminder to me as to what my line of argument was to be, and relying upon the moment to produce the words in which I would clothe the ideas." This combination of a logical and lucid argument, together with towering oratory, saw Menzies' speeches, be they delivered at the local town hall in Kew or the pulpit of London's St Paul's Cathedral in a tribute to his friend Sir Winston Churchill, captivate and inspire a whole generation of young Australians. It even didn't matter to Sir Robert if there was an interjector or two. The book is replete with examples of over-eager hecklers at Sir Robert's public gatherings, only to later find out that they come out second best. One of my favourites from the book is when Sir Robert said to one lady who was continuously interjecting, "Madam, I have no objection to your speaking in this hall, provided you do so some other night, or that you pay half the cost of hiring the hall tonight." This piercing sense of humour, which could often be self-deprecating, is well summed up by Sir Robert's comment in the book, "The safety and peace of the world depends on whether who laughs is in the majority." Sorry, just... I think I have what everyone has, which is... Another angle of Sir Robert's life, which is so beautifully elaborated in this book, is his abiding friendships across the political aisle. There was, of course, his close coalition colleagues, Eric Harrison, Artie Fadden, Alec Downer and Doug Anthony. But what may surprise some people who look to the adversarial nature of today's politics was Sir Robert's friendships with Labor MP Jim Cope, later Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Labor Prime Minister Sir John Curtin. After Sir Robert's death, Cope wrote to Dame Patty, which is recorded in this book, to say that her husband was, and I quote, a great statesman, respected and liked, despite any inevitable political differences, and that his name joins the list of immortals in world and Australian politics. And in 1941, John Curtin wrote, "Dear Bob, I thank you wholeheartedly for the consideration and courtesy which never once failed in your dealings with me. I wish you good health and fair going. Your personal friendship is something I value, as I hope and know you do, as a very precious thing." Even after Labor Minister Eddie Ward, a trenchant critic of Sir Robert Menzies, had died, Sir Robert got up to say some very gracious words in the House. Upon passing him in the chamber, Jim Killen said to Menzies, "How could you say such nice things about Eddie Ward after everything he'd said about you?" "Killen," Sir Robert said, "there's something good to be said about everyone. Who knows, in the course of time, there may be even something good to say about you." Menzies' sense of decency, on display in his political friendships, also characterised his relationship with the bureaucracy. It is quite clear from the stories in this book that from the civil service, Sir Robert Menzies expected professionalism and loyalty, not political affiliation. Indeed, one young man from his department who came to see Sir Robert made the mistake of saying, "I am so pleased you won, sir. I voted for you." "In that case," said Menzies, "you are no use to me." Menzies wanted public servants who would tell him as it was, not as they thought he would want it to be. One could be forgiven for thinking that as Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Sir Robert had little time for matters outside politics. But this myth is quickly dispelled by Heather, who recounts her father's interests in recreational sport, walking, tennis, fishing, snooker, where he learnt with Dame Patty from the great Walter Lindrum, and of course cricket. Indeed, so great was his affection for cricket that Heather tells the hilarious story that he once planted a willow tree in his backyard, hoping that one day it could be cut down to make some cricket bats. Menzies' experience as an amateur home movie maker and his friendships with Danny Kaye and Mary Martin also get an airing. These outside pursuits are so important, not just in understanding Menzies' personality, but also his great success. For as Heather writes in the book, his success in the field of politics was due in large measure to the balance in his life. But if one wants to understand truly the key to Sir Robert Menzies' success, it was not his wit, his intellect, or his outside interests. It was his remarkable partnership with Dame Patty Menzies. Mama, as Heather affectionately calls her, is described in the book as a woman of steel, not hard, but determined and strong. Never one to take a backward step, a South African news organisation once interviewed Dame Patty Menzies. "Mrs Menzies, is it true that you can cook?" came the question. "I am Australian," she replied. "If I could not cook, that would be news." A loving mother and homemaker, Dame Paddy was a prominent public figure in her own right, supporting community causes like the Women's Hospital, hosting functions for the wives of parliamentarians and foreign diplomats, and giving speeches on topics of interest. Indeed, her popularity with the people rubbed off on him, because it was not uncommon to hear the refrain, which is mentioned early in this book. "Not sure about old Pig Iron, but that little woman, she's a beaut, so he can't be too bad after all." And it is here I wanted to end with my own personal story. 2 weeks ago, I was at a function in the electorate of Kooyong at the North Bowen Bowls Club. I was talking to the ladies helping out in the kitchen, and one lady came up to me and apologised and said, "Sorry, Josh, I couldn't vote for you at the election." I said, "That's fine." And she said, "My whole family has been Labor, and in fact, my father was a Member of Parliament." So I said to her, "What is your surname?" or "What was your surname?" And she said, "My surname was Ward." And I said, "Was your father Eddie Ward?" And she said, "Yes, it was." I mentioned to her that in a couple of weeks' time, I had the privilege of launching Heather Henderson's new book. And she said to me, "I want to share a story with you." Many years ago, when my mother was invited by Dame Patty to a function that Dame Patty was hosting for the wives of politicians, Dame Patty extended an invitation to her. But she went back to Dame Patty and said, "I'm sorry, I cannot attend because I have a 10-month aged child." And Dame Patty said, "Don't worry, bring your baby along and I will look after it and you can enjoy the party." And so she did. She took her baby along to this function organised by and hosted by Dame Patty. And 50 years on, she says she has never ever forgotten that act of kindness and friendship extended to her by Dame Patty. Ladies and gentlemen, this story is no doubt one of thousands remembered and retold around the nation about two of the great towering figures of Australian political life, Sir Robert Menzies and Dame Patty Menzies. This book speaks volumes to their generosity, to their humility, and to their humanity. It is an important book. It's an enjoyable book. And to Heather Henderson, its distinguished author, we are eternally grateful. It is my great pleasure to officially launch A Smile for My Parents by the one and only Heather Henderson.
I have to, while I collect myself. And one of my daughters said this morning, sorry, I will come to the microphone. If you get stuck, tell them that limerick that you told us last night. And my father and I were particularly fond of limericks, and as we walked around we would recite them to each other. But our very favourite was, "There was a young man of St. Bees who was stung on the arm by a wasp. When they said, 'Does it hurt?' he replied, 'No, it doesn't. It's a good job it wasn't a hornet.'" Now, thank you to everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's marvellous to see so many friends, family, and the Menzies Foundation, who are such huge supporters. I really wonder what I would do without them. They've put everything together, done the whole thing. And I'm most grateful, and thank you, Brian, very much for what you've said. And I can remember my father walking round the town and people stopping him. And they'd say, "Mr. Menzies, you probably have this too, Josh. Mr. Menzies, you're doing a very good job, but there's just one thing. And then they would go on and on about that one thing. So I'd just like to say that the one thing about today is the invitation. I don't know who dreamt it up. It was nobody here was responsible, but the publishers did it, and I mustn't complain about them. They've produced a good-looking book, and they've been marvellous. But if you got that invitation and thought you were coming to a talk about a little thatched cottage in England, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And I don't know where they dreamt it up, and I'm very sorry for that. That's the just one thing. I did have a bit of problem with the editing. Part of it is because I'm old, and they're not. And partly the language is becoming more American. For instance, when I said Ken didn't want to be AWL when he was during the war, when he came down from Puckapunyal, and the editor changed it to AWOL, and I said that's American. This is Australian, and so many things were made American. And okay, the language is becoming American, but not my language is not, and this is my language in here. And I have to say, I am not a writer. I can only write as I speak and as I think. So it's any of the good bits, the literary bits. When I would go and write, Peter would say, what about doing a chapter about this or that? And the whole family, they're the ones who made me do it. Dwena particularly, she started off saying, you're always telling us things we've never heard. For goodness sake, write it down. So eventually I did. But then I would go and I'd write a chapter and show it to Peter, and he'd say, I think you need a little bit more there, or perhaps something finishing it off here. So when you come to the bits that are better written, they were written by him. But it's all right because I take the credit. But and I should also mention Kate, because Kate, I started off writing by hand, and Kate said, everyone was saying, you must use a computer. And I said, I don't think I could think with a computer. Anyway, she made me buy a laptop. And that, I must say, it didn't take long before I realised, yes, you can alter things very easily, and it makes it much quicker and much easier. Peter does the emailing. I just do the writing. But in the editing, there was one bit that puzzled me for a while, because I was talking about my father's office, and he played a trick, or sort of trick on his secretary. And I said in the office things were not entirely real or earnest. And I put a capital R and a capital E. And it came back with a small r and a small e. And I thought, so why did I say that? And it took a while to remember that when I was about 11 or 12, I'd had to learn a Longfellow poem. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. Pom, pom, pom. And further down it says, life is real, life is earnest. And that's where it came from. Why did it suddenly come out? And I wrote it. And of course I still think it should have a capital R and a capital E. But it might sound stupid when you read it, but you at least know where I got it from. There are all sorts of things in the book that are quotable, and Josh is, of course, taken all the best stories. But as he's the member for Kooyong, I forgive him. But there's a story about that I rather like. After the last book, I got a lot of letters, and I got a letter from a man called Mario Peroni, and I probably don't pronounce it the right way, but he lives in Melbourne. And I think it is a very good example of my father's memory, and interest in people. And Mario Peroni wrote, "Your father, then retired, was travelling to the USA via Tahiti. His office sent specific instructions that he did not wish to be met in transit. I was the duty officer in the early hours of that morning, and I did exactly what your father had requested anyone not to do. I met him at the foot of the aircraft. He greeted me with, 'Young man, you should be in bed.' I took him to a private office, and we had a long chat, during which he said to me that the best Italian migrants came from Egypt, because he was an Italian, Mario Peroni, which you might tell if I'd pronounced it properly. A year or so later, I saw Sir Robert walking down Collins Street. I went to him and said, 'Hello, Sir Robert. My name is Mario Peroni. We met at the Papeete airport.' I thought I'd made a real gaffe, but I was wrong. With that wonderful smile of his, he replied, 'Of course I remember you. You are the young man from Italian, I can't believe he did this, from Italian parents who had lived in Egypt, and you were very naughty to meet me at the airport.' Another thing which was extraordinary was that the doorbell rang one day, and there was a man there, and he said, 'You have many photos of your father, but I have one that you have not got.' And I said, 'Come in,' and he came in, and he produced the photo. And he said he used to work in Parliament House, and he got a photo of Dad the day he retired. And he got the photo with the car in the background, and he gave it to me. And he, of course, we're no longer strangers, we're friends, because he sends us an email every birthday of my father's. The day he retired, the day he died, he always stays in touch. And the day before yesterday, he appeared on the doorstep at 7:30 in the morning. I saw him coming with a big bunch of wonderful flowers out of his garden. So it is extraordinary the way all these stories keep coming back. But Heather will remember this. We were at the lodge a few years ago, and there was a big gathering because Tim Matheson had something, a charitable thing. And Tim came and got me and said, "Will you come out the front?" So I went out to the front, and there were three of us there, and somebody from the media came forward and said, "What was security like when you were at the lodge?" And I said, "Well, I think the best thing is to give you an example." And I said, one night my mother was carving, because she always did the carving, because Dad, well, he was told he was hopeless at it anyway, so he didn't carve. She was carving at the sideboard, and there were people there for dinner. And the parlour maid came in, and Violet was rather nervy, and Violet said, "Madam, there's a man in the kitchen." And Madam, clutching the carving knife, this little woman, walked out to the kitchen with the carving knife, brandishing it. The fella took one look at her and shot out the back door. And my mother went over to the back door, which was one of those little sort of plywood things with a bit of wire on it, and snibbed it. And she said turned and said to the people in the kitchen, "I have told you before to keep this door locked." So that's how it was. Now, I mentioned Peter before, but I'd just like to say, apart from doing half my work for me, it's his birthday today. So happy birthday.
Just some things which came out from the words of Josh. about Sir Robert, and it was fascinating to learn of the way in which he developed his techniques for making a speech, starting in a position where he was criticised to being probably unparalleled in this country as a public speaker. The other thing that I noted was the friendship that existed across party lines, and I recall at a function here, the late Frank Crean was here on one occasion, and it was very clear from talking to him that he valued very much the friendship with Sir Robert. And I suspect that there was much more respect across the floor in those days than unfortunately has been exhibited in recent years, and let's hope that can be restored. The quality of the senior public servants in earlier times, not to demean those at the present time, but there was something extraordinary about men who were heads of department and for a long period of time, and who had great loyalty but who were impartial in their advice. And Sir John Bunting is a prime example of that, and he was a person who was really the catalyst for establishing this foundation, working in a quiet way to make things happen. Heather, it's always a good thing to find out something more about the person who wrote a book, and that's why we all go to book festivals, to see whether we understood what the book was about, or is this a book that we really want to read. And your authenticity, your self-deprecating modesty just entice us all to come and read your book and to give it to friends for Christmas presents or otherwise. So thank you all for coming today. It's been a privilege for the Foundation to be the host.